You've never had heart surgery, but your entire financial life depends on one that happened in 1974. One doctors have been terrified to reverse ever since, because somewhere inside the American economy, there's a machine, not made of metal, made of oil, dollars, and a handshake nobody ever put on paper, and for 50 years, it's done the one job a heart is supposed to do: keep the blood moving. But right now, for the first time since it was installed, that machine is starting to skip beats. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what happens the day it finally stops. Because it's not a maybe anymore, it's a win. Let's start with the chart, because that's what a doctor does first. Not opinions, vitals. In the year 2000, the US dollar made up 71% of every dollar, euro, and yen sitting in central bank vaults around the world. Today, that number is down to 57%. That's not a heart attack. A heart attack is loud, sudden, and impossible to ignore. This is quieter. This is a blood pressure reading that keeps dropping a little more every single year, and nobody in the room wants to say the word out loud. But here's the question that should be bothering you right now. If the dollar is still the biggest currency in the world by far, why would anyone be worried about a slow drop like this? Stick with me, because the answer isn't in the number itself, it's in who's walking away from it. Central banks have been buying gold at a pace we haven't seen in decades, close to 1,000 tons a year since 2022. That's not a small trend. That's coordinated behavior from institutions that don't make emotional decisions. And gold pays you nothing. No interest, no dividend, nothing. So ask yourself, why would the most conservative, risk-averse institutions on the planet load up on an asset that earns zero? There's only one honest answer. They're not buying gold because it thinks it'll make them rich. They're buying it because it's the one asset that can't be frozen, sanctioned, or turned into a political weapon. And that single fact tells you everything about what's actually happening beneath the surface of this slow decline. Here's where it gets personal to the machine we're actually talking about. The petrodollar wasn't built on gold. It was built on oil. The entire deal in 1974 was simple. Oil gets priced in dollars, oil producers reinvest those dollars back into America, and in exchange, the world gets a stable currency while America gets buyers for its debt lined up for decades. But that pillar is cracking too. A growing share of global oil trade is now settled outside the dollar entirely. Countries that used to have no choice are quietly building the infrastructure to make dollars optional. So now we've got three separate vital signs: reserves dropping, gold rising, and oil trade diversifying. When three separate symptoms line up like that, a doctor doesn't call it a coincidence, a doctor calls it a diagnosis. Here's what almost nobody explains correctly, and it's the whole reason this video exists. The petrodollar was never a law. It was never a treaty signed in blood. It's not carved into anything permanent. It was a pacemaker installed in 1974 because the natural heartbeat of the dollar, the gold standard, had already failed in 1971. A pacemaker only works as long as the body around it keeps cooperating. It doesn't get thrown out in one dramatic moment. It gets slowly bypassed, one workaround at a time, until one day the body barely needs it at all. That's the actual diagnosis, not collapse, erosion. And here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. The British pound went from being the world's reserve currency to a secondary player in about 30 years. Nobody panicking in year 5 would have believed it was already over. By year 30, it obviously was. So the real question isn't whether this machine fails overnight, it's whether you'll even notice while it's happening. Let's walk through what happens if this keeps compounding, because this is the part that connects directly to your wallet. Step 1 is the easy part. Countries quietly diversify. A little more gold, a little more local currency trade, and a little less dollar. You wouldn't feel a thing. Step 2 is where it starts to bite. As demand for U.S. Treasury bonds softens even slightly, America has to offer higher interest to attract the same buyers it used to get automatically. And the U.S. already owes debt equal to roughly its entire yearly economic output. Higher interest on a number that large isn't a rounding error. It's real money, and it comes directly out of the federal budget every single year. Step 3 is the part almost nobody prepares for. A government that's run deficits for a quarter of a century straight eventually runs out of easy buyers for its debt. When that happens, there are only 3 doors left: spend less, tax more, or ask the money printer to cover the difference. Every single door is painful, and none of them are free. This is exactly what 2 economists warned about back in 1981. If a government never runs a surplus, someone eventually has to decide whether the debt gets paid back in real money or in printed money. The petrodollar system is what's been buying America the time to avoid making that choice. Erode the system, and the clock speeds up. So now you understand exactly why a slow, boring number like reserve currency share actually matters to your mortgage, your savings account, and your paycheck. As your financial doctor, here's the prescription. It's simpler than the panic content out there wants you to believe. First, this is a multi-decade trend, not a trade. Nobody should be betting their savings on a dollar collapse next year. It won't happen that fast. But building your entire financial life as if the dollar's dominance is permanent and risk-free is its own quiet mistake. Second, diversify the way the smartest institutions in the world are already diversifying. Real assets, broad market ownership, and some exposure outside pure dollar cash. Not because the dollar is dying, but because putting everything in one currency has always been a bet, whether you noticed it or not. Third, watch real yields, not headlines. If the government has to pay more to borrow because demand for its debt is softening, that shows up in your interest rate long before it shows up in a news article about the petrodollar. You can't personally stop a global currency system from evolving. That was never your job. Your job is making sure your own financial life isn't quietly depending on the assumption that nothing ever changes. Treat the things you grew up believing were permanent, like oil priced in dollars and the dollar as the world's safe asset, as things worth rechecking every few years. Not because they're wrong today, but because the last 50 years just proved they were never guaranteed to begin with. Every artificial heart eventually faces one of 2 outcomes. Either it gets replaced by something better before it fails, or it keeps running past its intended lifespan because nobody built a backup in time. America has had over 50 years to build real reasons for the world to keep using the dollar beyond the deal that started it all in 1974. Whether that foundation is strong enough to survive without the machine holding it up, that's the question we're all going to get an answer to, whether we're ready for it or not.